Well, hello everyone. How are you today? Excellent. So I want to start off by sharing a little bit about why I'm so passionate about diversity and inclusion. It may surprise you to know that the most valuable possession of my family is a roll of toilet paper. Now, I know you're thinking, Wanda, why in the world would a roll of toilet paper be so important to you? Well, it started on February 21st, 1962. Students at Morris College, a small, historically black college in South Carolina in the southern United States, should have been studying, attending classes, or simply enjoying college life. But these students had a different calling. These students had a higher purpose. These students were actively involved in the civil rights movement in the US in the 1960s, and they truly set out to change the world and to ensure equality and fairness for all people. Now, my mother was one of those students, and that afternoon in February, she went to the Crest department store to participate in a lunch counter sit-in. Now, if you remember anything about US history back in the 60s, and the 50s, this was the time of the Jim Crow laws. So black people were not allowed to eat at the same lunch counters, not allowed to drink from the same water fountains, not even allowed to use the same restrooms as white people. So participating in this lunch counter sit-in was a brave and courageous act, especially for a young lady who was only 19 years old. So that afternoon, my mom went into this Crest department store, and she has a very light complexion. So she was able to sit down at this lunch counter and order lunch without really being detected as a black person. She ordered a simple burger and a soda. When the food arrived, she motioned for the black male students to come in. And as they came in, she quickly pushed the food down to them and they began to eat. As you can imagine, chaos ensued. The white customers in the store became enraged. They called the police, who arrived quickly carrying visible blackjacks and billy clubs. And as they dragged those students out of that department store by their shirt collars, the students were threatened outside with police dogs and water hoses as they were tossed into the back of the police vehicles and hauled off to jail. Now, that was one of the many times my mother was arrested during the civil rights movement. And during this particular jail stay, she decided to write her story on a roll of jailhouse toilet paper. And on this roll of toilet paper, she describes her fight for equality and freedom and why it's so important to her. And the passage that means the most to me on this roll of toilet paper is when she actually writes to her mom. And she says, "Mommy, I know you told me not to get in jail. But," she continues, "I don't mind being in jail, as long as I know one day, when I have children of my own, they will have privilege and can do the things that we're fighting so hard for today." So I grew up looking at this roll of toilet paper, proudly displayed in our china cabinet, in my mom's jailhouse tin cup, which you see up here in the picture, with her name, Tilly, written on it in red fingernail polish. I grew up hearing my mother's stories about the civil rights movement and her fight for equality. And I grew up learning about the value of fairness and equality and diversity and inclusion in our lives, in our neighborhoods, and in society as a whole. And those lessons really shaped me into the person that I am today. And they've helped me to be extremely successful, both in my business life and in my personal life and in the community work that I do. And first of all, let me just say, my mom's pretty amazing, isn't she? She's pretty amazing. Now, I'm not going to say that there's not a time or two that she gets on my nerves, because she's my mom, but she's a pretty amazing lady. But the fight that my mother and so many others had back then in the 60s in the US is a fight that we need to continue today to ensure equality and fairness for everyone, because our world is rapidly changing. And we know that the demographics around the world are quickly shifting. We can see that from a global perspective, our population is expected to balloon to over 9 billion people in just a few short years. India is projected to be the most populous country with over 1.5 billion people. by the year 2030. Our population is aging, with the 65-year-plus population growing to be over 1.5 billion people. And our lesbian, gay, bisexual, and trans community is also growing, with a purchasing power estimated to be $3.7 trillion today. When we look at what's happening here in the Asia-Pacific region, we also see a lot of changes. Japan is expected to have the highest median age at 51.5 years in just a few years. 45% of Singapore's population is projected to be foreign-born by 2030. The increase in the population with disabilities is going to grow to over 1 billion people. And our Muslim population is projected to be nearly 30% in a few years. So lots of changes happening around the demographics. And women also are continuing to evolve within our world and our society. If we look today, women have purchasing power or investable assets at $11.2 trillion around the world. Like, that's a lot of power that we all have. And now we work in healthcare at Johnson & Johnson, and we know that women are the chief medical officers of our families, making more than 90% of all of the healthcare decisions for themselves and those that they care for. So we know that women are a very, very valuable customer base for us. And McKinsey just published a study in April that was looking at some of the changes around women here in the Asia-Pacific region. And McKinsey is projecting that if we could fully realize the full value of women in the workforce, that we'd be able to add $4.5 trillion to the Asia-Pacific GDP in just a few years. So this is something that we all ought to pay attention to, because again, the world is rapidly, rapidly changing. And we can look at all of these different changes in multiple different ways, but one thing is for sure, we know that there is a bottom line impact to our companies when we truly value and truly leverage diversity and inclusion. Now, this study by McKinsey was published in January 2018, and basically what it looked at was about 1,600 companies around the world, publicly traded companies, and it looked at their diversity and inclusion and compared it to the results that these companies were getting. And what they found was that companies that were more diverse outperformed their peers when it came to earnings before interest and taxes. So they found that companies that were in the top quartile for gender diversity were 21% more likely to outperform their peer set. Companies that were in the top quartile for ethnic diversity were 33% more likely to outperform their peer set. And those that were in the bottom quartile, 29% more likely to underperform versus their peer set. So there is a real, tangible, bottom line value to having a diverse and an inclusive company and organization. Now, there's a lot of changes going on, and we can choose to look at those changes as challenges, or we can say, how do we truly capitalize and fully realize the value of all of the diverse people in our organization and in our communities and in society to continue to drive innovation and growth for our organizations. And at Johnson & Johnson, we have chosen to look at this as an opportunity. Now, you all may know a little bit about Johnson & Johnson. Is anyone familiar with the Johnson & Johnson credo? Anybody know what our credo is? Of course, the 2 Johnson & Johnson tables. Thank you, I'm glad that you know the credo. So our credo is actually a document that's been in existence for 75 years. And it's a document that outlines the behaviors that we think are important to us as an organization. And it has 4 key tenets. The first tenet really talks about the responsibility that we have to the external world that we serve. Our patients, our consumers, the doctors, the nurses, the mothers, the fathers that use our drugs and our products every day. The second paragraph outlines the responsibility that we have to our employees to make sure that we're treating everyone fairly, that we're compensating people well, that people have opportunities for development and for growth. The third paragraph outlines the responsibility that we have to our communities to make sure that we're using our J&J big for good to create a better world and a better society. And the fourth paragraph outlines our responsibilities to our shareholders. And a lot of people think that's odd that the shareholders are last, but we truly believe that if we do those first 3 things right, that our shareholders have no choice but to realize a fair return on their investment. And that formula has worked for us for about 130 years. And as I talked through the credo, what you may have heard was that diversity and inclusion is actually embedded into who we are at Johnson & Johnson. And in fact, when our company was founded more than 130 years ago, more than half of our first 15 employees were women, which was kind of unheard of at that time. And so we are well recognized for what we do in diversity and inclusion. In fact, over the last week, we've had a couple of big recognitions. So in the US, one of the top rankings for diversity and inclusion is an organization called Diversity, Inc. And this is an organization that looks at over 2,000 companies around the US. And I'm proud to say that last week, we received the #1 ranking on the Diversity, Inc. list of top companies. So thank you. A lot of hard work across all of J&J to do that. And here in the Asia Pacific region, we received yesterday another great acknowledgement of the work that we're doing. And that was with the Nikkei Women's top companies for women in Japan. And 3 years ago, we were ranked number 24 on that list, but we received notification this week that we received the #1 ranking in Japan. So we're really proud of our team in Japan and all of the hard work that they've done. So you can see that D&I is a part of who we are, and while we're really pleased with those recognitions, we're in no way satisfied. We want to figure out, how do we keep getting better at this? How do we continue to excel at this? What is it that we need to do to continue to advance not only our organization, but to continue to influence the external world as well through the work that we do? So in order to do that, we set about building a new diversity and inclusion strategy. Now, when we started working on this strategy about 3 years ago, we decided that we were going to approach this like we would any business opportunity, right? And so we started off and we said, okay, what's the first thing we should do? Well, we're going to build a strategic plan. Let's do a situation assessment. So we looked internally and externally. We connected with more than 7,000 J&J employees around the world to understand, what does diversity and inclusion mean to them? What does it mean to us as an organization? We looked at our systems and our processes to make sure we understood what was happening there and where we had opportunities that we could make change. And then we did a huge external scan to understand best practices that were happening all over the world. And the insights from all of that work led us to 3 big strategic pillars that we're focusing on. The first is we are working on advancing our culture of inclusion and innovation. The second strategic focus area is we're working to build a more diverse workforce for the future. And the third is better connecting diversity and inclusion to our businesses to drive both performance and to continue to enhance our reputation. So across the global J&J enterprise, we are now all aligned that these are the 3 big things that we're playing for. And we are disproportionately investing our time and our resources and our energy against these 3 pillars. And I think that's why we've seen some of those recognitions that we've had over the week, because it's really paying off for us. So let me give you a couple of examples of how we're executing on these 3 pillars. So around advancing our culture of inclusion and innovation, one of the things that we recognized in our data and our insights was that we did want to build a more inclusive culture. And we really did a lot of work to understand how unconscious bias might be impacting our thinking and impacting some of our actions. And so has anyone in here done unconscious bias training or awareness? A lot of different people, right? And so there's lots of different ways that we can help people understand what unconscious bias is. And for us, we really wanted people to understand that this is something, unconscious bias is something that every single one of us has, right? And it's something that we don't control it naturally, but if we stop, pause, and think, we can actually take different actions. And unconscious bias occurs because your brain is processing millions of pieces of information every second trying to make decisions. And so then it tends to rely on stereotypes that we've seen over the course of our lifetime. And sometimes when we do that, our actions may not actually be aligned with our intentions. And so we want to make sure that our employees understand that that's why it's happening, that unconscious bias is something that we all have, but more importantly, to make sure that we're pausing and we're stopping at critical moments that impact our people to make sure that our actions are aligned with our intentions. Now, to help do that, we've done quite a bit of work. First, we've partnered with Professor Mahzarin Banaji from Harvard University, who is the author of Blind Spot, the book Blind Spot, The Hidden Biases of Good People. She's also the co-author of the Harvard Implicit Association Test, which is an online test that you can take for free that will help you understand your own unconscious biases. Has anyone ever taken that test in here? I see a few hands going up. If you haven't taken it, I would recommend that you Google it and take it. It is enlightening. Now, I'm going to tell you, I took the test when I was in this role, and I opened up the test and I thought, I am the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer. I am not going to have any biases, right? And I am going to do everything I need to do while I'm taking this test to make sure it shows that I don't have any biases. Guess what? I have biases, because we all have bias. It's just the way our brain works. But it was enlightening to kind of understand the kind of biases that I did in fact have, so that again, when I'm dealing with people or when I'm working through different processes, I can stop and think and make sure that I'm not allowing those unconscious biases to impact my decision making in a way that is truly not my desire. So along with educating about unconscious bias, and one thing, I'll say, we instituted several different things to help our organization have a greater awareness and an understanding of what unconscious bias is. And I actually just got a notification today, I got an email today, that of our 30,000 people leaders around the world, we now have 95% of them that have gone through this training around unconscious bias. So to be able to execute that in a really short amount of time globally, I think is helping us to really create the kind of environment and enhance the environment that we already love. And now we're in the process of rolling out that training to the remaining 100,000 employees around the world for J&J. But we know that doing that training creates a great awareness, but it's not just awareness that causes your behaviors to change, right? You have to see this over and over again, and we recognize that behavioral change is a longer term play. So we've also worked with our systems and processes, particularly around the talent spectrum, to embed mitigation strategies around unconscious bias at all of the critical steps. So from talent acquisition, to having coaching conversations, to performance reviews, to even making compensation decisions. Our people leaders and our decision makers are constantly being made aware that these biases may exist and how they may be impacting their thinking, to make sure that we're treating everybody fairly and equally. And then the last program I want to highlight around here is another one that comes from this particular region, and it comes from the country of Japan, and probably is one of the key reasons that we were able to move to that #1 ranking with the Nikkei Women Index. And that's a program that we have that's called the Switch program. So we know that in Japan, it is very normal to work very, very long hours in the office, long, unhealthy hours in the office, right? And so our organization decided that, and it actually was led by one of our team members here, Sarah McKenzie, decided that we wanted to really help build a better work-life balance for both men and women, and find a way to try to engage more women into our workforce. And so we launched this program called the Switch program. And this program is about switching our mindset, switching behaviors around work-life balance and what a healthy working life looks like. But it's also about literally switching off the lights at a reasonable hour and closing the building down. So the lights go off and people are forced to leave the building, and then they can go home and they can spend time, both men and women, with their families and with their children, or do things that they love to do to ensure that they're having a healthier overall experience, not only at work, but within their life. So I thought this was just a great program that was instituted by our colleagues in Japan, and I think it's one of the great ways that innovation really comes from all people all around the world, one of the great examples of that. So those are just a couple of the highlights of what we're doing around advancing our culture of inclusion and innovation. Around building a more diverse workforce of the future, I'll highlight two things. One is we recognize that in the talent acquisition process, again, there can be biases that seep into our thoughts, and especially in job descriptions. So when we look at job descriptions, there are certain words and phrases that inherently are biased against women. When we use words like rock star or superstar or ninja, or when we use words like expert, those are inherently biased against women. So if you have a job description and it has 4 kind of job qualifications that are on there, and it says, I'm looking for an expert in these things. A woman will look at it and will say, well, I'm expert in the first one. I'm really good in these 2. I have a little bit to learn in this fourth one. I probably wouldn't consider my expert. I'm not going to apply for this job. Whereas a man will look at it and say, I'm expert in the first one. I'm pretty good in these 2. I don't know much about the fourth one, and I have a lot to learn there. I'm going to go for it, right? And that's how it happens. And men will kind of put themselves out there, even if they don't feel like they can check off every qualification on its job description. So we've partnered with this company that's really a pretty cool technology called Textio. And it's based on artificial intelligence, and it's looking at word patterns and phrases. And what it allows us to do is to actually upload our job descriptions, and it highlights for us in different colors words and phrases that would inherently be biased against women, words and phrases that could be biased against men, and words and phrases that generally are considered positive or negative. And so this has really reshaped the way we are doing our job descriptions and helping us to create job descriptions that are engaging many, many more candidates and all different types of candidates that's helping us to build a more diverse workforce of the future. The other avenue that I want to share here is our employee resource groups. So we have many different employee resource groups. Globally, there's really 3 that we've been employing around the world. One is our Women's Leadership and Inclusion team. The second is Open and Out for our LGBT, our lesbian, gay, bisexual, and trans colleagues. And the third is Alliance for Diverse Abilities. And so those are the 3 that we have globally. In our US marketplace, we have about another 10 different employee resource groups. But we work with our employee resource groups through every aspect of diversity and inclusion, from gathering data and understanding the insights, to co-creating our strategy with us, and now, most importantly, to helping us execute that strategy in every step of the way. So for example, for building a diverse workforce of the future, we've trained our employee resource group members to be talent scouts for Johnson & Johnson and to help us find great diverse talent and recommend them into the organization. Now, around our third pillar, enhancing business performance and reputation, I'm going to highlight one success story from this region that I think is pretty innovative. So in our Malaysia market, a market that is fairly challenging, a category that's challenging is mouthwash, because mouthwash typically includes a lot of alcohol, right? And in the Malaysian market, with the Muslim population that does not drink alcohol, that was an issue, and people weren't buying mouthwash, rightfully so. So our colleagues in Malaysia worked together, and they came up with this innovative idea of creating mouthwash in a different way using green tea that has no alcohol. And in doing that, we launched this product in Malaysia. In the first, I think it was the first 60 days or so, we had about a 7% market share increase. And now this is a product that we actually have exported outside of Malaysia to all different parts of the world where we have other cultures that would not want a mouthwash with alcohol in it. So a great example of our employees coming up with a great innovative idea, connecting diversity and inclusion to the business, and really using that idea to generate real innovation, real growth, and bottom line dollars for the organization. So those are just a couple of the examples of how we're actually executing on our strategy that's now employed globally around diversity and inclusion. Now, we know that we still have a lot of work to do. And I know you're all here in this room because you know that we all have a lot of work to do to make sure that we are really creating a more fair and a more equal world. So what can we do together to keep driving equality for everyone? The first thing is we need to make sure that we are using our voices. As women, as minorities, we tend to hide bits and pieces of ourselves. Right? We tend to want to kind of fit in with the people that are in power. And we have to get comfortable with being our true, authentic selves and using our voices to make sure that we're sharing our ideas, that we're giving our perspectives, that we're challenging the status quo. And if we do that, number one, we're going to drive a lot of new ideas. We're going to add different perspectives to the conversation. It is going to drive innovation and growth for our organizations. But secondly, we're going to be happier for it, because when you are able to be your real authentic self at work, you are more balanced, you're happier, you're more creative, and at the end of the day, it's better for you all around. So let's commit to speaking up and speaking out and using our voices to really let people know who we are and share the ideas that we have. The second thing that we can all do is to really work together to prepare the next generation. We know that in order for us to lift up the generations that are coming behind us, we need to really kind of wrap our arms around them. And we need to commit to advocating for them, mentoring them, and even sponsoring this next generation to try to accelerate their development and accelerate their careers. And the third thing that we can do is ensure that no matter where we are, whether we are in our organization, our company, whether we are in a community group, wherever we are, that we are building an inclusive environment to build a better world. So let's make sure that we're making sure that everyone's voice is heard, that we're listening to everyone, and that everyone, no matter where we are, that we're helping them to feel like they belong. And I think that if we do these three things and we can commit to these, that together we can truly build a more inclusive world and a more inclusive society. So thank you all for listening to what we're doing here at J&J. And I think we have a moment to take a question or two. Is there any? It's already 4 p.m. That means I have to go get on a plane. Okay, so let me just, I'll take one question.
Okay.
Is there a question out here that anybody have a burning question that we can answer, that I can answer for you? Anybody? Okay, there's one right here.
What did you do in Japan other than the Switch program that made you #1?
What did we do in Japan other than the Switch program?
That made you #1 on diversity.
Yeah, I think it's been a combination of things. So this Switch program really, I think, highlights how we're trying to build a more diverse environment. And the outcomes of that have been fantastic. So Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong, but the number of stress leaves decreased by half when we did that program. We've gotten more women entering into our organization and staying, and our retention has been much better. But in addition, all of the things that we just talked about. So we've done the unconscious bias training, we've done different things around acquiring talent, we've been teaching how to do job descriptions in a different way. And you know, I think that there's a couple of things that we're doing in Japan, but also around the world. And that's, you know, if you really want to drive diversity and inclusion, it has to start at the top of your organization. And if you have a leader that is committed to it and that literally makes a declaration that this is important to us as an organization, and I'm going to hold everyone accountable for it, real change actually starts to happen. And from spending time over the last couple of days with many of our Asia-Pac leaders, and actually over the last couple of years, I know that our leadership in Japan is 100% committed, is consistently talking about the value of diversity and inclusion, and definitely is driving accountability at all levels. Okay, so thank you all for your time. I really appreciate it, and thanks for inviting me to join you today.